So, Laura Tingle, thank you for joining us at the CMT this morning. We really appreciate your time. We suddenly have a signed agreement committing us to the building and purchase of nuclear-powered submarines at some point in the distant future, the purchase of second-hand subs from the United States, and a new defence strategy, it seems, and all of it without an awful lot of media attention. So, where was the media scrutiny?
I think this was a real case of boiling frog, Monica, which goes back to 2021, when Scott Morrison first announced AUKUS with Joe Biden and Boris Johnson. All of the attention was on the fact that we just ditched the French and behaved rather badly. And there were so many questions about what AUKUS actually was. They couldn't tell us what submarine was involved. They couldn't tell us where it was going to be built, how much it would be cost, whether it was going to be a current submarine or a new generation submarine. And then there was this whole second rung of stuff, which was so spooky that nobody could talk about it at all, like, AI and missiles and drones and all sorts of stuff. And then we had sort of immediate bipartisanship on it. So there wasn't much political debate about it. And it was all sort of like, you'll all find out in good time. And because Labor had given itself no outs, to sort of say, well, look, of course we endorse this in principle, but, we'll have to see because things are rapidly moving or whatever. It just became, it was already a fait accompli in a way. And everybody just sort of went, oh, okay, that's fine. And, we're not very good at submarines. So, our expectations are low. And so when this thing came along, everybody just, I don't know, I think they sort of had a collective brain snap or mind fart or something. And just, I think the coverage last week was absolutely gobsmackingly jingoistic and unquestioning and bizarre, frankly.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that, that the journalism class, so to speak, began to sit up and pay attention when Paul Keating appeared with you at the National Press Club? Was that what caused, was that the change?
Well, I think that was certainly the shockwave. You'd had that sort of really extraordinary series in the SMH, the Herald and The Age, about, the war threat and red alert and all that sort of stuff a week earlier. So the conversation was floating around, but that was very the hawkish view. You haven't, as I said, because of the bipartisan nature of this, you haven't really had anybody of great substance and, do you want to say firepower, coming in and just saying, actually, this is a complete crock. It's sort of interesting to speculate about whether it would have had as big an impact if Keating hadn't been so rude to the journalists in the room. It might have had more of an impact, or it might have had less of an impact, but it would have had an impact because, one, he's a very powerful communicator. Two, he's got standing. Three, even if he's dismissed by a lot of people as a China dove, he raises powerful questions. And they're the sorts of questions that I think needed to be raised and which hadn't been raised up until that point.
Now, I just want to take you back, though, to your comment earlier about the way the media handled the announcement and the kind of the barracking for Team Australia that seemed to be going on. If we dig a little bit deeper into that, what do you think was behind that? Was it that there had been so little information, that there had been so little questioning by the media that, you have this big deal where suddenly Albanese appears in the United States in San Diego with the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of the UK, and it is obviously a big deal for him and for Australia. Were they kind of swept up in that? Was that what was behind it?
Well, I think, mechanically, when you're sort of presented with a big media event like that, and you're reporting on it, you tend to, engage footage of submarines diving and, flags and all that sort of stuff. And because there'd been a big question mark over this deal and what would happen, the apparent slotting together of the American and UK arms of it all sort of seemed incredibly neat. They were getting all this sort of gushing, briefing from people. And I think the fact that there was this huge number thrown around, which, pick a number, any number, but $368 billion. And everybody's just going, oh my God, shit, that's big. So I think, we're in an age where there are still experts in foreign affairs and defence within the journalistic ranks, but more than has ever been the case, everybody's a generalist, everybody's punching out journalistic sausages once every 24 hours, and today's, instant expertise subject is X. So, you cover the road accident and you move on. And I think, the fact that, there's nothing that gets people in the press gallery going as much as suggesting somebody's been politically clever, and so without doubt, the idea that Anthony Albanese had sort of stolen the clothes of the coalition on foreign affairs and defence, that he could suddenly be, the defence guy, all of those things, it's all a bit cunning. It delivers to South Australia. It's got that political overtone. All of those things, I think, affect and infect the way people cover a story.
Okay, and they were beguiling enough to cause the media to kind of barrack and support it.
Yeah, I think so. Plus, if you think about it, the major broadsheet, or the Australian, and I think probably most of the News Corp tabloids and the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age now are basically dominated in their editorial line by, pretty alarmist China hawks. Now, I'm not suggesting, China isn't alarming, but the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age had sort of, hung out their banners a week or two before this all happened. So they were all looking at it as in, hurrah, we're saved. The Australians' banner, was it Freedom Fleet?
So two reporters who you couldn't put in the generalist camp, so they had some kind of expertise, were Matthew Knott and Peter Hartshell, and they wrote the All Were Behind the Red Alert series. When you read that, what was your reaction? What did you make of it?
Well, I wondered what it had looked like when it had started. I sort of thought, it wasn't just the coverage, the red map of China and all the fighter jets and everything, though that was extraordinary. But, it's a perfectly legitimate exercise to sort of raise this as an issue. But, one, they didn't have anybody professing any alternative views, but even the way it was written had a sort of, I kept on thinking of that character on Mad as Hell, the chief sub from the Daily Telly, because there was a lot of references to, there were these sort of partial quotes which would say, yes, it's China, all right, and things like that. And you're going, what is, it's like even the copy, it was not Hartshell copy. I mean, Hartshell, is a journalist of substance, and as is Matthew Knott. They are both journalists of substance, but even the way it was written didn't sound like them. I sort of felt like somebody had got to it, it was, I was quite shocked by the fact that, these two very staid old mastheads were running this, very hysterical coverage. It certainly had a real look at me sort of tone to it, I thought.
Were you surprised then that the Sydney Morning Herald came out in such strident defence, given the extensive criticism of the pieces?
I thought it showed a bit of a glass jaw. I mean, if you go and punch somebody out, or that's probably not the right expression, but like if you sort of go out and take a stand, you've just got to live with the consequences of it, and you defend it, absolutely. But, I think the tone of their thing was, which I found really bizarre, was, but the ABC and the Guardian have written stuff like that as well, which is sort of not exactly defending your own journalism. It's sort of like, but everybody else did it too. It's just, I don't know. I don't understand those newspapers anymore, quite clearly.
Now, you've been around a long time, Laura, and you've seen Keating in full flight on many an occasion. Have you ever seen him in such flight as he was when he appeared with you at the press club?
Well, if we split it up into his commentary in the what I suppose you'd call it a conversation with me, but yes, I have seen him like that before, both in terms of his savagery about our colleagues and in his savagery about an issue. in terms of the way he dealt with the journalists, look, yes, I've seen him like that on lots of occasions. Most of my colleagues in the press gallery now haven't seen him like that. Is it okay? Well, it's not good. And as I've written and said, it's not good because it took away from his message. But yes, I've seen him like that plenty of times, being quite offensive to people. But I suppose I would also add, and I'm not saying this is an excuse, just as an observation, he's now not in politics. So he doesn't give a rat's, he doesn't care whether he offends any journalists. I thought it was unfortunate that he didn't actually just answer some of those questions because it took away from the case he was putting.
Well, I mean, two things there. I mean, the reaction from journalists, at least on social media, was pretty self-defensive, and they were scathing about him in return, and not only in social media, actually, in many pieces of commentary after that, which I found somewhat surprising, that kind of inability to look at the way journalism had covered an issue and wonder, well, did we make a mistake?
No. I'm sorry. I couldn't believe it, actually. I mean, some some very senior people in the press gallery getting completely distracted onto whether Paul Keating had been mean to journalists. When this enormous story had just landed, and there were bigger fish to fry. Look, this is not a game for the faint-hearted. We've got to hold power to account, To think that politicians don't talk about us like this, all the time is beyond naive. And frankly, I find it really red hot that some of the people, who've been making this commentary, don't exactly support their female colleagues in particular in the newsroom on a day-to-day basis, at any time I've seen in 40 years, and I'm not talking about this particular generation now, but, lots of times when Keating would come for me, the blokes weren't coming out and saying, oi, just pull your head in. And my view was, look, it's, I don't care, he can say what he likes, doesn't worry me. And I say rude things about him and his policies. He's personally offensive to me. Is that good? No, but it rebounds on him. And I just feel I mean, I know times have changed, but in some ways journalism hasn't changed. And we're not the story, Monica. We should never be the story. The story is what's going on in these major strategic decisions that are being taken about us as a country, and that's what we've got to concentrate on.
He made journalists the story, in a sense. I mean, as you say, by doing what he did, he deflected a little bit of attention away from the substance of what he was saying. But what I do find interesting is that as a result of what happened at the National Press Club, the issue has been blown open.
Absolutely. He has blown the issue open for discussion, and which nobody else has done. You've got a bipartisan, completely watertight thing where nobody wants to say anything at all about any of it. I mean, things like, we're now going to have all this, tons of still super weapons grade level uranium, which we're going to have to now find a safe home for, Yeah. I mean, can you imagine this happening 20 years ago and everybody just going, oh, okay, fine. There are so many issues here. But you've got a bipartisan position in the political realm, and you have a completely compliant media to date in just sort of going, this is great, good for industry, good for our defences, yep, it's great. But even on Saturday, the government was having to change what it was saying about why it was doing this. Suddenly it became, we're protecting our sea lanes. Presumably that's not protecting our sea lanes from sending all that iron ore to China. But, for days, people were sort of quite, and I think Harcher was one of them, talking about having submarines based off the Chinese coast so that we could counter their capacity to hit us with missiles by being able to hit them with missiles. I mean, this is mad stuff. I mean, that we are having these discussions where it's all sort of secret squirrel because this is what people, you know, who are hawks are being briefed about stuff, but we aren't being told what is it we're actually trying to achieve with these submarines, and why has our defence posture changed, and what are we trying to achieve? So the fact that Richard Marles, the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister, had to come back in on Saturday and Sunday and sort of say, oh, this is actually what we're doing, and no, we haven't done a quid pro quo with the Americans about going to war with Taiwan. I mean, I think that speaks volumes for the impact that Keating's appearance had.
Yeah. Laura, just a final question. There is a tendency, I think, in Australian journalism sometimes to do kind of journalism that is conflict escalatory, if you like, and particularly at times when there's international tension around, and it's kind of easy to do. It offers up its own tropes and themes, and it's easy to kind of slot into that kind of journalism. What difference do you think it would have made if, as a cohort, you know, journalists were more focused on AUKUS earlier? You know, if they knew more about it, if they were more inquisitive and curious and were asking more questions a lot sooner, do you think that would have changed things?
Well, I think it would have, because instead of just being, you know, overwhelmed by, you know, oh, this is a really big thing. You know, there would have been more of a capacity to slice and dice into individual elements of it, you know, into, you know, the industry side of it, which in some ways the Prime Minister was pushing harder than the defence angle. You know, this will be good for the economy. You know, so where is the money going? You know, who's getting it and when? You know, the nuclear issue, you know, all the questions, very big question marks about whether and when we get the Virginia-class submarines, you know, all of those sorts of things. People would have been approaching it with more confidence to be questioning it, you know, which I think is what our job is.
So in that sense, is it less a failure of journalism and more a failure of government in terms of the transparency that it wanted to bring to this issue? I mean, if the government had been more transparent, if it had been more open about what it was doing and where we were heading with this, that there might have been a better chance that journalists would have been able to do their job.
Oh, I think so. I mean, I think, you know, failures all around in all of this. And I suppose in some ways, what worries me the most out of it is this is an area, you know, defence and national security are one of those last bastions of places where governments don't just say, oh, well, we can't tell you because, you know, national security or defence. So, you know, they revert to secrecy, but they're briefed by a series of institutional structures which don't believe in transparency in the first place, and particularly in Australia. I mean, our defence establishment is shocking in terms of, you know, telling you anything about anything. So I think, and what happens, of course, as we've seen since 9/11, you know, the national security apparatus tells governments various, you know, if you don't spend this money or give us this power, the world will end. And if you're a politician, one, you don't have the expertise, and two, are you going to be the person who somebody can say, well, they told you, you know, if you didn't spend this money or give them this power, this would happen, and now look what's happened. So it's a really dangerous part of public policy and politics, and you know, and it requires governments to actually stand up and, you know, make sure that they're doubly open to scrutiny. And, you know, the fact that we usually find out more from the Americans about what's happening than we find out from our own people is a really damning indictment, I think.
Laura, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very, very much for your time.
A pleasure, Monica.